Puppies.
Living my bucolic life, 3 ugly city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and some spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
We're getting closer to the end of this project. This one right here, making the cardigan jacket. And I don't have a lot of time today, but what I want to try to do is work on putting the trim on my front piece. And also, if I can get that done, put together my lining for my bodice and hopefully get that attached. So, first step is working on my trim. So let me turn you back down. So this pattern comes with a template that should, there's one for each size, and it should match your neck and this angle coming down. And I tried that on the other day. And so when I was getting my trim together, I went ahead and I formed it into these 90-degree points where hopefully it needs to be, just by making a few extra little stitches that are invisible from the right side to hold it at that angle. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside for a minute because I want to start marking up on here. Now, in order to match the same placement that's here and on the cuffs, where's the cuff? Here you are. It's actually going to be closer to this placement here than this one. What I need to do is draw my lines. I should be able to draw a line at 1 1/8 inches. So I want to start over here and see how that works with my buttonholes. So if I line up my ruler with 1 1/8 inches, that's going to put a trim placement right there, which is pretty close to that buttonhole. So looking at the pattern, it looks like actually that's how they have it. They have their button and the trim butted up right next to it. So I could do that. You know what? I will. Why not? I will. So that's what I'm going to do. I am going to just, my ruler is transparent, which is very helpful. So I can line it up with my edge of my ruler at exactly 1 1/8. And I can draw this line. So give me a minute. I'm going to draw it all the way straight down both of the front pieces. All right, so I have my lines drawn on my front pieces here and here with my heat erasable pen, which will disappear when I iron it. But before I draw around my back, I wanted to modify this slightly. I wanted to actually drop this back neckline about 1/4 inch because it seemed to be a little bit high, a little bit uncomfortable. So for right now, I'm just going to draw that on there. I'm not actually going to clip anything on it because I don't want to risk undoing any seam up here. But I'm going to use this new line here to base my placement line for my trim on. So basically what I'm going to do is just at various points, measured off 1 1/8 all the way around here, and then I can come back and just smooth out that connecting line. So I can just, like I have all of these little marks, I'm just going to come back and connect them like this. Alright, so I'm over here at my ironing board. I am just doing one side at a time. So I'm starting with my buttonhole side, and I have it just sitting up on top of my sleeve roll, so I'm not going to be hitting anything else. And so I have my stitch witchery that I've trimmed down to about 1/4 inch. And I'm going to start by up at this corner. I want to make sure I get my corners right first. So I'm just laying my stitch witchery down along my mark. And I'm going to place, you know what? I need to put just a little bit off to the side here to anchor this edge of this corner also, just in case my iron hits that. So I am going to place my trim up here. I'm focusing on these first couple inches right up this way. Oh, hang on one second. I actually just had to switch my braid on because I had it opposite side. And the only difference is when I was stitching my corners, one side those little stitches are visible and the other side it's not. And I want to make sure that my invisible stitches are not showing. So with that, I am putting this back down again. And I am just going to stick a little pin up here just to kind of hold that while the hot iron is nearby. Get this one out of the way so I don't erase those lines unintentionally. And I am going to move my pen just down here so I can get this little off to the side part really quick. Okay, so now this little top part is somewhat anchored. So now I should be free to go ahead and place the rest of this down right here. And I'm just very carefully, as I go, I'm double checking to make sure that I have the same amount of spacing next to my buttonholes, because that, even if this is right and these are slightly off, it'll look painfully off if that spacing isn't correct. So okay, and moving along. So you get the idea. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, finish off this side, and I will be doing this little corner up here and this side in the same way, and then we'll come back and go around the neck. All right, I just wanted to point out before I move on, after ironing the front, I flipped it over, excuse me, I flipped it over and pressed it from the back also, and then just to make sure that my braid didn't come off, there's a few places where I went ahead and I just put a pin from behind just straight over it, anchoring it on there just in case while I'm doing everything it wants to come loose, I will not let it. Okay, so getting these 2 points was my most critical point here. But what I want to do now is try to see how close, and it should be very close, to actually making it straight on my marking line, I can put my trim. Now, if some of this has shrunk or something, or it's not exactly as I had planned, this is my time I'm going to change it. I'm playing with pins. See how I just kind of pulled that pin over so I could move my trim up and down a little bit just to try to guide it and match it up and everything. So I'm going to kind of do that over my marked line, see how close I can get, and if there's any adjustment that I need to raise or lower it to fit my trim, I'm going to do that with my pins, so that when I come back with my stitch witchery and make it permanent, it's already evened out. All right, so I have it kind of set up here on my pressing ham to give you an idea of what I've got going on. And it looks pretty good to me. Because it's just a regular braid, if it was too long, I could just kind of scrunch it together and shorten it. I was thinking if it was too short, I could try to there's not much ease built in there, you know, it's pretty straight, but I was thinking I may kind of be able to stretch it. But it's actually covering up my marking line all the way around. I think it's going to be pretty darn nice. I'm going to start in my front. So what I'm going to do is just take off one little pin, or maybe 2 at a time, so I can get to this, put my little bit of stitch witchery there, place it back over it, gently hold it in place with a pin and get my fingers out of the way while I iron it, and work my way to this shoulder, and then do the same thing from this side and work my way to this shoulder. Okay, so I have my fronts kind of pinned together on my ham, and this is like wrapping around like a neckline here. And I just have this is my center back, and I just kind of put it over my marked line and stuck a pin in it. And by doing that, I can make sure it'll place exactly, and I think I'm good. So right now I have it fused up to the shoulder line. So I am just going to take, one pin off, tip this whole thing over here, take one pin off, slip my stitch witchery in, and go all the way around nicely. This is just fused. I need to go back and do my hand stitching the way I've done everything else, but just giving you an idea, I think that it looks really good. Just to make sure it holds, I do have my little pin tacks there, just double securing it because we don't want anything to move. But I think it's going to look lovely. All right, so now time to hand stitch. Alrighty, so first thing I did down here in the seam allowance is I just took some stitches by hand to secure this braid so that when I clip it, it's not going to want to come undone, because that would be tragic. And just like all the other times, I'm just going to come up on the white part of the braid. I'm just going to catch 2, 3 at the most little felling stitches to secure it in place. So I got 2, 3 on this one. I'm going to come back over here. Strange angles with the camera. And take a few little felling stitches over here. And that way it's pretty invisible, it's pretty secure, and it's going to go very fast too. All right, getting there. There is the trim. I think it's lovely. So when it overlaps, it's going to overlap so that you don't see this side, obviously. But knowing my daughter, she's not going to have it buttoned all the time. Actually, she probably will rarely have it buttoned. So I think it'll work out. This is about the amount that it's going to overlap. Let me raise it up a bit here. So you can see, I think it's going to be really cute. But I need to set this whole part aside for a little bit and do some work on my bodice lining. So what I need to do right now is actually sew my bodice lining together, but I'm doing it in 2 separate pieces. I'm doing the right side and the left side. I'm not joining it in the center back right now. You can see I have extra fabric on my center back. I have a wider seam allowance, Sometimes you need that. So I have a side front and a front, and this little bitty piece that goes, well, it's actually this way, under the arm. And so I need to sew my back to this little guy, to this side front, to my front. Now, if you remember, I had to use this piece, which is my front piece, for my lining, because I want my lining to be the actual size up here, whereas the lining for doing it, the Claire Schaefer version, for some reason is not. I'm sure we'll figure out why when you get to that point. But what I'm going to need to do is actually make a dart here instead of just the gathering. So that's why I have my little stay piece, because I can just, well, actually what I need to do is mark these 2 little circles that I had punched out for the gathering stitches, and then I can place my little stay piece over those, and that's going to give me the place to mark my dart markings. So I can take that out and mark that dart just like that. So even though this piece doesn't have a dart, you have this it's a dart. So I need to go ahead and make my darts on both of my lining pieces. You know how to do that by now. And then sew all of them together. After I sew a seam, I am going to come back and serge that seam with both pieces together. I know that it's going to be on the inside, and so technically I shouldn't have to, but this stuff wants to fray a whole lot, and I am going to be manipulating it somewhat before it's done, and I don't want to risk it, you know, coming apart. So, and this is the trial run. It's the trial run to see what works and what doesn't. I can't forget that. So just to show you the step-by-step so far, I have my darts put in, and I have this front, so to this side front serged, and I have it just pressed, you know, over actually towards the center, and I'm going to do the same with this one over here, and then we'll put the little short piece on. Good morning, welcome to the next day. And I got caught up in some things and couldn't finish last night, ran out of time, but we're going to finish with this lining, getting the lining put in, and at least getting the lining attached to the sleeves and get ready for the next part. I've got 2 hours, so I'm going to see what I can get done. So let me tip the camera down and we will get back into it. Okay, so at this point I have my 2 lining parts, and keeping them separate. The back lining piece, when I cut it on the selvage, so I'm not going to have to worry about it fraying or anything. So once I sew that, it can be done. I did go ahead and sew and serge and press all of these seams, and I did serge around the very edge of my armhole, mainly because this stuff frays a lot, and while I'm working with it, I just don't want it to come apart, you know. Just don't want to deal with that, and it's probably superfluous, but such as it is. I have transferred my little dots from my patterns on both my bodice front and back here, and this is a sleeve. I've just peeled down the outer layer here, and onto the sleeve I have those dots too, so I can match these up in 3 points, my shoulder and these 2 dots. At this point, I'm not going to put gathering stitches or anything onto the lining. I don't care if it has little puckers. I kind of want to see how much needs to be eased in, and so this is a test run for that too. Trying to do this so that I don't stretch this part out. It's a little precarious. Okay, so the back piece, if you look at your sleeve pattern, you can tell your back piece has this little extra jaunt out, okay? So when you have your sleeve, I can see this one that has this little extra piece is my back, all right? So, you know, as I do, I'm going to put a little letter B right there. That'll come out. Now I'm going to just kind of tuck this piece inside and just kind of tuck it down for a moment. I'm not going to cram it in there because I don't want to wrinkle it, but just to get it out of my way. And if this is my back, then I want to make sure I'm lining this back up to the back piece of my garment. And I'm just going to go ahead and match everything up here, match up starting actually at the top, at the shoulder seam. I'm going to match up my shoulders, match up those dots, and hopefully it should fit all the way to the bottom. So let me get this pinned in, and I'll show you how it fits. Okay, so I've got it all pinned on, and there is, and it may just be because of the lining fabric got a little wonky on me, but there is a bit of easing that looks to be apparent all the way around. Up on top, there's easing there also, but for at least the lining, I think I can do it, you know, just on the machine. There will be puckers, but it's lining, so I'm not worried about that. I will take much more care with the outside fabric. what I am going to do is starting, like this is my very bottom seam, I'm going to start sewing here, go all the way around. At this point I'll come in about 1/8 of an inch and go to an equal part over here, to like right about there. Alright, so I've got it sewn on here. Just wanted to show you. Sewed it all the way around. Now, again, I knew there would be a pucker, and there's a pucker, but it is lining, so I think that's going to be okay. So where I have it double stitched down here, okay, I'm going to come back and trim that, trying to make sure I don't cut something I don't want to. So when I turn it right side out, I'm going to go ahead and actually push the regular fabric up so it's not crumpled down in there any longer than it needs to be. Okay, so that now from the outside, from the inside outside, this is what it looks like. Okay, I'm going to turn the whole thing right side out. And just kind of push all of this lining down inside of there. It won't hurt it to be there. And now this is ready to go ahead and attach to the main jacket. Alright, so I am just remarking where my little sleeve placement gathering dots are. And what I need to do, one thing I want to point out, my interfacing is coming loose, and that's because I'm handling it so much. Plus, since this was a home deck fabric and it did have a coating, even though I washed it a couple times and dried it and everything, if there's ever a coating on your fabric, that whether it's for stain guard or wrinkle guard or sun guard or whatever, that's going to keep you from having a really, really good bond. And because of that, even though it was good to start with, I've manipulated it so much that there's places where my interfacing is starting to come loose. So I need to be careful. If I got to this point earlier and I saw that it was totally coming off and not giving me any stability, I think I would do something else up there, but I can tell by the shape of my pieces in comparison to the interfacing, I haven't really stretched out of shape. There's enough of it holding that I think I'm fine. With that said, what I'm going to do is run 2 rows of gathering stitches between the dots, you know, running one at like 3/8 of an inch, one just a little bit more, maybe closer to 1/2 an inch. I want those fairly close to my stitching line. So I'm going to go ahead and put those on both of these sleeves. Alright, so I have them stitched. You can probably see this side better. I have my 2 rows gathering stitches. I know it blends so well, but you know, since this is actually hopefully going to be a garment that will be worn, I didn't want to use an outlandish color. But you can see there's 2 rows of stitches there. Alright, so as much as I want to jump in and attach these right now, I'm actually going to hold off for a moment because before I do, that trim's so pretty. What I need to do is put my 𝐤𝐤𝐤 interfacing along the bottom edge of this. And so, oh, and I wanted to point out one other thing. This jacket comes with a back interfacing piece, and I'm skipping it. I think that my fabric is thick enough and substantial enough, and I kind of want it to be a little bit soft in the back, and since I already have a thin row of interfacing, I'm actually going to skip that piece. Let me see here. Where are you? Here you are. So this is it. You know, you can do you, make your own judgment based on your own fabric and everything, but I'm going to skip that for this one because I'm not interfacing this and this too. I just don't think that's necessary. But I am going to be putting my 𝐤𝐤𝐤 along the bottom because I want that to have a nice edge. So just like for the sleeves, the first thing I'm going to do is draw a line where my 5/8 inch seam allowance will be. And that's going to give me a base to line this up. Right like that. Alright, so I've just drawn a little bit of a 5/8 seam allowance line here. Sorry it does not show up so well. There, maybe you can see that better. So I'm just going to start it right there in that corner, and again I am just barely overlapping the edge of this just so it covers up that line that I drew. I'm going to pin it in place and work across here, and I like how it secures my little seam allowances, and it's going to want to kind of keep those under control. So once I have this pinned all the way across, and because it is cut on the bias, this bottom edge, it's not perfectly flat, as you can see. It kind of wraps up and down and everything. I can gently guide it all the way across. And I know I mentioned it before, but this is taking the place of the interfacing, and I don't see that piece, but there's a big long interfacing piece that comes with this that's kind of cut on a slight slope. This is taking the place of that, and because it's cut on a bias, I'm able to mold it into that shape if I want to. Okay, so just so you know. So what I'm going to do is pin it and then come back and just barely along the edge here, I'm going to baste it down just to catch it so that I can move the pins and feel confident with that. Alright, so I have it all basted at the bottom here. Hopefully you can see tiny little basting stitches right there, okay? Well, actually they're very wide, but they're very light colored. What I'm going to do is, before I catch stitch the top, I'm going to press this and let my iron ease the bias threads to the shape it needs to be able to form exactly to my jacket. So I'm just going to, you know, with the steam iron, just lay it down and press it nicely, pin it in place, and then I'll come back and catch stitch all along the top. Alright, so I'm starting at this edge and I'm going to work my way over and just taking little stitches. My fabric again is very, very thick, so if I just take one or two little stitches through the thread, it's not going to show it all on this side. It'll be invisible, and these stay in. Now you can probably see I have a buttonhole down here. So once I have this whole thing catch stitched, I'm going to come back and I'll deal with that buttonhole, but for right now I'm just going straight over it and securing it nicely. Okay, so I want to deal with this buttonhole really quick, and I'm going to just draw a line right down the very center of my buttonhole here, and I can see on this side where it's ending and beginning, and I can actually feel that with my fingers. So I'm just going to feel where it's ending, and about 1/4 inch out I'm going to put a little mark. Okay, so if, you know what, I'll stick a pin in it. I think that might be the easier to see. So this is where my buttonhole is actually ending, okay, on this side, and sticking the pin through. This is where it's actually ending on this side, alright? This is my safe zone out there. So what I'm going to do is, with some very sharp scissors, is come in here, and where it's actually ending, I'm going to cut it and split that wiggle open. So now that it's like this, I can just fold these little pieces out and baste them into place. Actually, I'm going to fold them under. I think that would be better. Okay, and I'm just going to baste those in place very carefully. Yay, so I'm going to press this really quick just to make sure it's all clean for sure, and oops, looks like my basting stitch missed a little piece. I think it'll be okay. Run into town to take care of a few things, and now I am back, and I'm getting excited because we are getting so close to finishing this. It's very exciting. Okay, what I'm going to be doing now is attaching my sleeve. So I'm just going to kind of tuck that lining business inside, and this sleeve is going to go on this side over here. So I need to very carefully match it up. Now I am going to be carefully gathering my threads here and trying my very best to make sure that I don't have puckers or gathers up there. But I'm going to go ahead and pin my matching up my shoulder seam up here at top, my dots where my gathering starts, and all the way around here. Alright, so I have it pinned so far all the way around. This under arm place on the bodice here, the very center of that has a little square mark. That is the center of the underarm seam. This part, this is the square here, matches up with this, so it's basically the center of this matches with the center of the sleeve piece, okay? And then I matched where the dots are, and there is a little bit of easing in the back, but not so much that I can't work it in. And I will be basting this by hand before I go to the machine to sew it, so as I'm sewing it by hand, I can kind of work that in. Now up here, I have it just clipped up in the top center and down the sides, and what I'm going to do is just pull my two threads, trying to do it as evenly as I can to take up the difference between my outside and my inside. What I ultimately want is a nice tight little sleeve head that is not going to show pucker on the outside. So if I'm basting it just inside here, I think I can do that. So with that slightly gathered, I'm just going to clip it the rest of the way around, and then I'm going to come back with my needle and thread and just with a running stitch sew this all the way around so I can pull off all the pins, take a better look at it before I go to my sewing machine and put my permanent stitches in. So as I am hand stitching it around, I have a little piece of a measuring tape that the end got chewed up by a dog or something years ago, and I've just been cutting pieces off as I go. So I cut a piece off that is 5/8 inch, and that way I can just line it up with the top. And as I go, I just kind of draw my little mark and then clip it under one of my clips so that when I get up to that point, I can just pull it off and keep going. So I just wanted to show you that. But this is actually the second sleeve. The first one I have already sewn on by hand, not by machine. So you can see my little marks all around it. But I want to show you what it looks like when I open it up. Let me raise you up. Okay, so I hope you can see it is a lovely smooth cap on that sleeve. There's no puckers. Because I was stitching it by hand, I was able to smooth everything out, and I think it's going to be great. It will need to be pressed, and I do press it so that my seam allowance goes into the sleeve. But when I'm going to sew it, let me open her up again here. When I'm going to sew it, I can follow along with my hand stitched row to make sure that I'm stitching by machine exactly where it needs to be so it's not going to pucker or anything like that. And this is what it looks like inside after I have gathered those threads. All right, so it's gathered enough, but not too much. You know, it's actually a very nice amount of fabric to gather in, so it sets well. I've got the sleeve sewn on, and it is looking so cute. I'm getting really excited. I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on this thing, so I haven't done anything else but just sew it and flip it. But I just wanted to give you a quick look. I think it's so cute. Okay, now with that, there's still so many more steps to do, but we can do this. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is put a sleeve head in. And for my sleeve head, what I am using is, this is from a package of bias tape that's made out of fleece, okay? So it comes in the package like this. I like it for a sleeve head because it's very soft, it's cushy, It's cut on a bias, and this side is already folded in the right amount. So all I had to do is come in, open up one side, and press that part flat. Okay? Now, what it's going to do is, I just have this kind of clip there so you can see. When I open up the top of my jacket, this little cushiony bit right here is going to be sitting between the sleeve and the gathered up edge of the seam allowance. And since my seam allowance is pushed out, and I don't really want the textures of those ruffly gathers to in any way poke through, this acts as like a very soft, cushiony way to get a standardized shape here. And if you're ever having trouble getting your sleeve head eased in right, you know, if it really wants to pucker and it's not sitting right, sometimes adding a sleeve head piece in there will really help that to look a lot more even and smooth. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm hand stitching it to the seam allowance up here. And I am just going to find the center of it and clip the very center to my seam allowance. Just like that, and move these sides over here. My strips I cut 9 inches wide, so total, if you're starting from scratch, these strips are 2 inches wide by 9 inches long, okay, but ½ of an inch is flipped under. So I'm just going to slip stitch it into my seam allowance. And I have it in generally, it's not an exact science, but I have it in generally placed so that most of my fold ends about where my seam line is, and I'm stitching up here at the top of it. This is the very bottom of my sleeve, you know, the underarm area, and I wanted to show you I did double stitch it, so I have 2 rows of stitching, you know, from about this point on each one. So I am going to come in here and trim it out. I'm using my regular scissors because I don't think my pinking shears would get into these heavy multiple folds very well. And since it will be lined, I'm not very worried about it fraying because my second row of stitching is going to keep that from happening. So I just wanted to show you before I forgot that I am trimming out this underarm area. Alright, so now I have it stitched in up here, so when I go to open up my jacket, like this, hang on, lift you up, and with the seam allowance again pressed out, it's going to give it a nice padded shape right here, okay? So that's the point of that. But wait, there's still more to do. I need to come back in here. I'm just going to settle all that in because now it's time to actually stitch in place the shoulder pads. Alright, so these are the shoulder pads I'm going to use, and I want the smooth side on the top. On this particular shoulder pad, it's like a felt on the inside, a felty flannel on the inside, and more of a smooth, almost like a pell-on type on the top. I want this on the top, I want this on the bottom, okay? So what I need to do is, since this is the side I'm going to be looking at, this is my little notch there that is going to mark my seam line. And I'm just going to very carefully, because I did not mark this before for some reason, line up that notch with the seam line and just make sure how I need to set it so that everything is going to line up. Okay, so now I'm going to sew my shoulder pad to my seam allowance, and I actually am folding it kind of in half, you know, matching up where I'm supposed to be here, but kind of in half, and lining it up with my shoulder seam, okay? And what I'm going to do is very loosely stitch it on by hand. So I'm going to start down here at this end, come up just in the seam allowance. I'm not going to try to get outside of the seam allowance at all. And these are going to be sewn on fairly loosely. So I just come up, catch a little bit of the shoulder pad, come down, catch some seam allowance here, and I'm not snugging it up super tight. I actually want it to be slightly loose. Come back up. Don't go all the way through your shoulder pad, just, you know, catch enough that you can secure it. I'm just catching that bottom layer and maybe a little bit of fluff, but not much. And just keep going up and down, you know, catching about 1/8 of an inch at each time, enough that it's going to hold without pulling through. So I've got it to the end here. And I want you to see how loose my stitches are, okay? I can see a little gap in there. And I'm just going to secure that down here. One more time, one more little stitch at my seam allowance. Just take a couple little stitches in here. One sideways for fun. And then I can clip that. So to tack down the bottom corners of my shoulder pad, I'm going to just place it where it should be. Take one stitch up through the, and I'm only sewing in the seam allowance. I'm going to sew over my chopstick because I want to make a tack that's loose. So I'm just sewing, probably about 3 big stitches, and this is some pretty strong thread, up and over my chopstick. Alright, so I've just kind of set it up here on my seam, my dress form, and my dress form is not her size, so, you know, but we're making this work. So what I do is I reach in here and I'm pulling down that sleeve head strip to make sure it's not bunchy in there anywhere. And I'm just kind of setting it on here to get a look of if they look uniform and everything, and I think they do. Now I'm just going to show you a little bit closer how that sleeve head looks. I like how it's coming out nicely and then dropping down. That is what I like. And let me see if I can put her in the back here so you can see up here too. Alright, so I've been sitting here looking at my jacket. And it's nice. It's nice. Now, all along I had planned to do this funky technique where I get to this point, I twist a sleeve a certain way, pull a lining a certain way, sew up and around one side, up and around another side, flip the whole thing inside out, sew around the bottom, flip it again, and then I can just press it and go. And I was actually playing with this for a while, and because it's one thing being able to do it, and it's another thing being able to explain how you're doing what you're doing, especially when you're manipulating things like this so it makes sense. So I was playing with it for a while, and I think I'm going to change my plans. So this is my thought. This jacket, a cardigan jacket, especially this design, it has no facings, all right? It's just the inside is lining, the outside is fabric, but there's no facing that goes around, which is a little bit tricky for me. Because like on the sleeve, let me bring you in here. What I did on the sleeve was basically that, where I sewed it and I flipped it and I understitched it and everything. And it's okay. It's down here at the edge of a sleeve, and so, you know, that's fine. But I don't really like the idea of, on a jacket, especially one that's supposed to be really nice like this, having the possibility of something pooch out, okay? And so thinking about that with this, if I did that like right here front and center where it's just fabric and then lining, I think there's a real chance for it to start to look messy. So I need to change my plans. Now the way that she does it is as you're sewing, well, let me just open this up here. basically, in a nutshell, folding it over, you know, pounding it down really well, and then when you come back with your lining, so say this is pressed really well and everything, when you come back in with your lining, you can sew your lining in a little bit, so there's no chance of it showing through on this side. And while it's like this, stitching it so that it's going to be held in place really, really well. So I think we're going to do something more closely related to that technique. Just because I'd hate to go through all of this work and then end up at the very end with something that looks kind of sloppy here. You know what I mean? So because of that, I'm going to switch gears. So let me find a ruler here. What I need to do then is basically figure out where my 5/8 inch is. And it's both around the neckline and on this side here. It's about 1/4 inch from my trim work, which is by design, so that's good. So what I'm going to do is actually go to my sewing machine, I'm going to unpin my lining from the edge and shove it back in my armhole. I'm just not dealing with the lining right now. But I'm going to run a row of stitching all the way around the edge at 5/8 so I can see very clearly where it is, and it'll act like a stay stitching. But I'm using a thread that's going to blend, so unless you're really staring at it, you're not going to see it because those stitches are going to stay there. So I am going to actually, as I am tucking this fabric under and pressing it, I am going to use stitch witchery just to clamp it under, okay? But before I can do that, I need to get my corners settled. So I'm going to do this the official Claire Schaefer corner way. What she has you do, because we're using her edging technique, is at the corner, and I marked my stitching line because I have my threads running like that. She says to cut almost to those threads in the corner and then cut one of those triangles out. Clip this a little bit better here. Okay, so one of these little triangles is out. And then she wants you to fold it so those two butt up together. Fold it in and then fold it down. So you're getting a little bit of a mitered edge. It's going to be tucked in like that. Even on hers, it's not a full miter, but it's in enough of an angle that it doesn't show from the outside. So that is the Claire Schaefer way. So I'm just going to put a clip there really quick to hold it. I will be stitching that by hand. I need to come back, and what she says is not to clip this. She says just to fold it at that stitching line. Okay. And mold it, fold it and mold it. And since it is somewhat on a bias here, that's what we're going to do. Okay. So as I iron it, I believe I can just stretch this enough that I can make it work. At the worst, I can trim it down a little bit, but we're gonna go with it here, okay? Now, when I was making my stitching line around the very back here, remember I said I wanted to lower it a bit? So I actually ran my stitching line where it would be if this was trimmed out. So I am going to come back in here and trim out some of my neck, probably about 1/4 inch down, and then just taper that to the outside edges. But again, it's going to be folding it at my stitching line and then just molding it in. Once I have it all preliminary pressed, then I'll come back with my stitch witchery and fuse that in. Okay, so back at this corner that we folded in, the Claire Schaefer method, I am just going to stitch it down. I have a knot at the end of this thread, and I'm just going to hide it in there in between the folds and stitch it down so that it doesn't want to come undone. And I'll probably run this stitching about 1 inch each way along here just to keep it nice and secure. Then from the outside it looks like this, which I think is much nicer. So one last thing, because we are now doing it this method, I have gone ahead and removed that stay tape that I had on around the edge here. Since it's fusible, I could pull it. It was good that I had it on while I was putting this together. I think it did its job, you know, holding everything in place very well. But because I need this to actually stretch now, keeping that stay tape there was kind of counterproductive. So I have removed it and just thought I would let you know. All right, we are getting so close to finishing this. I'm getting very excited about that. Hang on. All right, so before I have it all pressed under, I did use stitch witchery to hold it so it would be pressed in. I will be stitching it when I come to put the lining on, but I wanted to get it just, you know, nice and uniform first. But before I can secure the lining in here, I need to sew these buttons on. So I'm going to draw my center front line on here. Like that. And I'm also going to open up my buttonhole stitches so I can reach in there. So there's about 1/4 inch on both sides between. All right, we should be right about here. Okay? Because if it's 1/4 inch on this side and 1/4 inch on that side, that should center it up. So, putting a pin here and up here. Okay, I'm just going to go inside my little buttonhole and do a little sideways. Okay. And that gives me the crosshatch point where I need to sew my 4 buttons. So let me go ahead and get to that. These are the buttons. They are the same as the ones that are on the sleeve, except they're slightly bigger. They have little crowns on them. You know, they're very cute. Now, I'm actually going to do something a little extra here. I'm going to actually come in and thread mark where each of these are. And that is just because I didn't think about it before, but I have all of this ink here, which disappears as soon as I iron it. However, since these are shank buttons, I am concerned I'm not going to be able to get my iron underneath there all the way. So I'm marking it with thread first, and then I'm going to go over and iron it to take those marks off. And one other thing, because I'm hemming it all this way, if I had known earlier that this is the method I was going to be using, I would have done things in a little bit different order. At the point where I'm assembling the bodice part, I would have, in addition to putting the trim on, you know, because that would have been probably easier than after. It was fine after, but like one of you pointed out to me, why didn't you do it then? And the reason I didn't do it then is I hadn't made it up yet and I was getting anxious to move on. So, but at that same stage, I would go ahead and do all of this folding under, all of this mitering of corners and everything at that point. So anyhow, let me go ahead and iron this to erase that mark and I'll be right back. Alrighty. At this point, I am just going through, folding under and pinning my lining on here where I'm going to be stitching it. And, you know, I'm just folding it and folding it. So I guess at this point, I'm close enough to the end that I can say, if I was to do this again, what would I do differently? And well, next time I do it, I'm actually going to be using her method, you know, so there's that. But, well, I already told you I would do this folding business in putting this trim on at an earlier stage. But you know what? I think it's not bad. I really don't. So I have more handwork than I was planning just because I didn't strategize this exactly right. But I don't think that it's a nightmare or anything like that. So, you know, we live and we learn. And right now I'm going to start hand stitching this. So this is what I have. Because I still have my center backs open, what I'm going to be doing is kind of overlapping them up here. But I'm going to leave this for last. I'm going to hand sew from like this point all the way over and down. And when I get to the bottom, I'll stop like 2 inches from the bottom because I'll need to adjust and move up. And there's a lot extra down here just because my folds are set down farther. So, you know, everything is skewed a little bit south, but it's not so much that it's going to affect how it's worn at all. So I'm not too worried about that. But that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start, like here's my center back, you know, and I'll deal with that after I get this sewn and then down. And the way I'm going to do it, actually I'm going to start down here. I'm just going to do little felling stitches and I'm going to attach it. Hang on a second. Get you under there. If I was being really, really particular right now, I would be using silk thread and all of that, but I am not. So I just take a little stitch, move up about 1/4 inch, and take another little stitch. Because it's just attaching a lining, I don't think that I need to, you know, be super, super close, but it's enough that it's going to hold it in nicely. So basically, you see those little stitches right there? That's what I'm going to be doing. So it comes up here, it's going in and out, and that is in addition to the stitch witchery here. This little folded under edge is going to be secured by these stitches also. So anyhow, I think that that's going to give a much better final finish to the outside edge, and there's absolutely no way this lining is going to be peeking out that way. So okay, so this is actually going rather quickly, which is a good thing, and I want to show you how I'm dealing with the top. I am just laying the one side completely flat. The other side I am folding under about 1 inch. Remember, I cut it with 1 inch larger seam allowance. And so this is what the top looks like, okay? I'm not worrying about all of this right now, not until I get to the bottom. So I'm just going to go ahead and stitch across here, and that's going to do a couple things. It's going to give me kind of like the impression of a vent in the back, and I will be able to make the final adjustment when I get the bottom hemmed in. Alrighty, so I got all of these buttons on. Everything is nicely stitched in. I got my center stitched together also. You can see just nice little stitches going down there. And when I sewed this coming down, I made sure that I actually caught the seam allowance underneath it, and that's going to keep this lining from wanting to shift a lot. It's going to keep it nice and in one spot. So the next step I need to do with another needle and thread is I need to kind of tack my sleeve linings in. So I'm going to put just a little tack at the underarm, you know, down here, just a few stitches. And then also up here at the very top, I'm just going to put a couple stitches up here just to hold it in place so that it's going to want to stay put. So I'm going to do that really quickly. And I know this is off subject and everything, but I want to show you this cool little knot because I don't want a little ball of knot showing and everything. So I'm just going to push it in from behind, and I've got it doubled, so I got 2 tails in the back. Okay, I'm not going to pull them all the way through. Then make sure I get my fabric there underneath it. I'm going to take a small little stitch, pull one thread around the needle this way, pull the other thread, hold it down here, the other thread goes around the needle the opposite way. And then you just pull it up and it sinks it in there. It makes a secure little knot. And then I can come back, clip that side, and I still have a great little knot there. It's a hat maker, it's a milliner knot. I think they have other names for it, but I just like it. So I'm just going to make a few little stitches like that and just clip it off. So I'm going to do that on the other arm also, and that's on the inside, so it's not showing at all when you just open it up. Alright, so my very last thing I need to do is open up this lining for my buttonholes. Can't believe we're already finally there. Actually, what I'm going to do is just baste around each buttonhole first so that I have its little area nice and secure and in its little zone. So I just kind of pinned the lining in place. I'm just taking some very large basting stitches just to hold it, probably, oh, I don't know, about 3/8 inch away from the buttonhole on all sides. Just like that. Okay, so on the right side, I'm going to stick a pin at either end of the open buttonhole. Okay, I can flip it over with my pin, make a little mark showing exactly where that opening is. Okay, this is very important. Do you know why this is very important? Because it's very easy to cut too far when you're not paying attention. I got in a hurry thinking I'm almost done, I'm going to go really fast, and I cut too far, and then I tried to hide it by making little like stitches over it, and it looked even worse, so I put a patch over it, and it's a lot faster just to do it the right way first. So what I need to do is come in here now, and actually I need to, just like when I was making these buttonholes, cut a little triangle at each side and a little line like that. Okay, so these scissors are fairly, and I'm cutting only the lining. Cut over here. Okay, so now I can tuck these little triangles inside, and when I iron it, all that ink will disappear. Okay, so those triangles are just stuck inside. I'm just going to stick a little pin on each side just to anchor those. And then these little sides I can just tuck in like this. Tuck it in, just grab a couple stitches down here at the end. It wants to come untucked very badly. Once I iron it and the blue lines disappear, it will look a lot better. Okay. So now on this side, I'm just going to fold this little edge underneath. Fold it under like that, and I'll stitch across there. Same thing, tuck that in, fold that in, stitch across there. Alrighty, so let's trim that off. I'm going to clip my little thread here, pull out my basting stitch. Okay, so that's it on the wrong side now, and that is the right side. And when I go to pull a button through it, looks just like that. I think it's beautiful, and it fits through really nicely. So very pleased with that. I'm going to do the next two, and then we'll get our final look. Alrighty, everybody, this is it. So remember, this was our test run through the pattern. Learned some things, but for a test run, I think it is pretty darn presentable. The skirt is obviously just kind of pinned over because the mannequin is the different size. She's a very slim mannequin, but I think that that is just adorable. So these sleeves, remember, they are non-functioning buttons, but they are the same buttons as on the front, just smaller. And everything is lined. So if I open up the button, you know, it's very nicely lined and everything inside. I did not put a chain on the bottom hem on this one. I will on the next one, but I think that it's okay the way it is. So yeah, I am so pleased, and thank you so much for going on this journey of making this trial run of the cardigan jacket. I'm not going to call it a Chanel suit because, you know, it doesn't live up to their standards, but I think it's fabulous. So thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.